She slipped silently into the lecture hall, a modest woman dressed in a gray sweater. When the renowned professor challenged her to tackle an unsolvable equation, the audience shared sly grins. They were on the verge of witnessing a historic moment in mathematics and the most gratifying humbling this university had ever seen. The lecture hall at Texas State University hummed with excitement as Professor Richard Harrington approached the podium. His reputation as an eminent mathematician, department chair, and someone who scorned those he considered less brilliant preceded him. Sarah Mitchell settled into the back row, adjusting her plain gray cardigan over her white shirt. At 37, she stood out among the graduate students, but her goal wasn't to fit in. It was to learn. Today's symposium will explore Raymond's hypothesis and its relevance to quantum computing, Harrington declared, his voice demanding instant quiet. His silver beard and sharp blue suit exuded authority as his gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Sarah. His lips curled slightly in subtle disdain. She recognized that look, the swift judgment, the dismissal. It mirrored the expression she'd faced 3 years earlier when applying for a custodial role at the university. The symposium kicked off with talks from doctoral candidates. Sarah scribbled detailed notes, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm during discussions of mathematical concepts. When the floor opened for questions, she kept her hand lowered. Life had taught her that people like her weren't expected to speak in such settings. During a break, Sarah caught 2 students murmuring nearby. "Who's the janitor taking notes?" One chuckled. "Probably just here for some adult education credits." The other said with a dismissive tone, "Harrington can't stand when non-math folks show up to these events." Sarah clutched her notebook tighter but kept her face calm. They had no idea that mathematics had been her solace since childhood, that she'd mastered advanced calculus on her own during late night shifts while raising her daughter single-handedly. They couldn't imagine the equations that swirled in her mind when she closed her eyes. As the symposium continued, Professor Harrington unveiled his bold take on an unresolved mathematical puzzle. His presentation was polished, but Sarah spotted a subtle error immediately. She'd spent countless nights grappling with that very equation. "Any questions?" Harrington asked, his tone implying he expected none worth addressing. The room stayed quiet until Sarah, almost against her will, raised her hand. The instant her arm lifted, she regretted it. Every head turned toward her. Professor Harrington's eyebrows arched in feigned astonishment. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his words laced with deliberate condescension. "I was curious about the variable substitution in step 4. Sarah said, her voice quieter than she intended. "Doesn't that lead to inconsistencies with the boundary conditions?" The room fell silent. Several students exchanged looks. Professor Harrington's face tightened. "Your name?" he demanded. "Sarah Mitchell." "And your department?" Sarah paused. "I'm with facilities management." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Harrington's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "Facilities management," he echoed, letting the words linger. "How fascinating. And you think you've spotted a flaw in my work?" Sarah's cheeks warmed. "Not a flaw exactly, just a possible issue that might." Harrington cut her off. "Instead of challenging proven mathematical methods, perhaps you'd be better suited to simpler tasks." Laughter erupted from several students. Sarah's face burned as she sank back into her seat, wishing she'd stayed silent. What she and the room didn't yet know was that this moment of embarrassment would spark an astonishing revelation. Professor Harrington wasn't finished. Having found a vulnerable target, he seemed intent on making Sarah an example. "Since our facilities management guest is so confident in mathematical theory," he said, adjusting his tie with deliberate care, "perhaps she'd like to showcase her skills." He motioned to the chalkboard. "Come up, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah froze. Every instinct urged her to refuse, to flee. But something deeper, perhaps pride or frustration from years of being underestimated, propelled her to stand. The walk to the front of the lecture hall felt endless. Each step reverberated on the wooden floor as whispers trailed her. She accepted the chalk from Harrington's outstretched hand, avoiding his gaze. "Let's keep this simple," Harrington said loudly, his tone dripping with mockery. The word, simple, carried a sting of condescension. He turned to the board and scrawled a complex differential equation. Sarah recognized it instantly. A problem from advanced multivariate calculus. Tricky, but not impossible for someone with proper training. The real challenge wasn't the equation, but the public humiliation it was meant to deliver. "Take your time," Harrington said with mock kindness. "We're all eager to gain from diverse viewpoints." While more laughter spread through the audience, Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she studied the board. Behind her, someone muttered, "This is hard to watch." Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a visiting professor from MIT seated in the front row, frowned at Harrington's theatrics but stayed silent, observing Sarah with keen curiosity. Sarah took a deep breath. The symbols on the board began to form patterns in her mind, familiar from childhood. She'd never studied beyond community college, but mathematics had been her sanctuary during lonely nights, after her husband left, after her daughter slept, during breaks between scrubbing floors. She lifted the chalk and made her first mark. "Perhaps we should simplify," Harrington started, but he stopped as Sarah began writing with confidence. The room grew hushed as she worked systematically through the problem. Her initial nerves dissolved as she immersed herself in the graceful flow of mathematics. She was no longer in a judgmental lecture hall, but in her own mind, where numbers always made sense. After 2 minutes of utter silence, Sarah completed the final step, set the chalk down, and stepped back. Harrington stared at the board, his smugness giving way to confusion. He scrutinized her work for errors, but found none. The solution was not only correct, but elegantly executed. "That's correct," he admitted grudgingly, though anyone with basic calculus training could have done it. Dr. Chen's eyebrows lifted slightly as she exchanged a glance with a colleague. Harrington, unwilling to yield so easily, erased the board quickly. "Let's try something more difficult," he said, his tone sharper. "Something from my current research." He wrote a new equation, one Sarah didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't from any standard textbook. It was cutting-edge theoretical mathematics, the kind found in niche journals. "This problem relates to quantum computing encryption," Harrington explained to the room, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "If you'd rather return to your seat, I'd understand." The challenge hung like a gauntlet thrown. The room held its breath, expecting Sarah's retreat. Instead, she picked up the chalk again. Sarah studied the new equation, her confidence wavering briefly. This was intricate, abstract, with notation she hadn't encountered in her self-study. For a moment, doubt crept in. Perhaps she'd gone too far. Maybe Harrington was right about her limits. The silence grew heavier as seconds passed. Students leaned forward, some with sympathy, others with amusement. "As I expected," Harrington said, reaching for the chalk. "Let's move on with the symposium." "Wet," Sarah said softly, pulling the chalk back. Something clicked. A pattern emerged from the symbol's complexity. She recalled an article she'd read during a lunch break, hunched over a library computer, about a new approach to quantum encryption mathematics. She began writing, slowly at first, then, with growing assurance. The room's tension shifted as students exchanged puzzled looks. Even Harrington's smug expression faltered as Sarah navigated the problem with unexpected finesse. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes widening at Sarah's approach. It wasn't just that Sarah was solving the problem. She was taking a novel path, revealing remarkable intuition. Halfway through, Sarah paused, frowning at her work. The equation seemed to hit a dead end. Harrington's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "A valiant effort," he said, reaching for the chalk again. Sarah held firm. She stared at the board, her mind racing. The room faded as she focused entirely on the problem. Then, like a lock clicking open, she saw the solution, an elegant transformation to simplify the equation. She resumed writing, her hand steady now. The chalk's scratching was the only sound in the silent hall. When she applied her transformation, gasps came from the front row where senior faculty sat. Dr. Chen whispered to her colleague, who nodded enthusiastically. Harrington's face paled. He no longer watched Sarah's work with disdain, but with growing unease. What she was doing shouldn't have been possible, especially not from someone without formal training. "That's not the usual method," he said sharply. Sarah didn't reply. She was too immersed in the mathematics, in a flow state she'd known all her life when working with numbers. She wasn't just solving Harrington's problem. She was enhancing it, uncovering efficiencies he hadn't considered. As she neared the end, the room's atmosphere had transformed. Students who had laughed earlier now sat in stunned silence, their faces showing a mix of confusion and admiration. Professors in the front row whispered urgently among themselves. Harrington seemed torn between maintaining his authority and a growing fascination with the mathematical brilliance unfolding before him. Sarah was nearly finished when Harrington stepped to the board, closely inspecting her work. His finger traced a particular transformation she'd used. "This simplification," he said, his voice taut with restrained emotion. "Where did you learn it?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I didn't learn it. I just saw it." Their eyes locked in a moment of silent confrontation. The esteemed professor and the maintenance worker, connected by an equation bridging their worlds in unexpected ways. Before Harrington could respond, Dr. Chen stood. "That's the Liu Takahashi method," she said, her voice resonating across the hall. But it was only published last month in the International Journal of Quantum Mathematics." She fixed Sarah with a piercing look. "How could you possibly know it?" The question lingered as every eye turned to Sarah. Sarah looked at the chalk in her hand, suddenly aware of the pivotal moment before her. For years, she'd concealed her talent, convinced no one would believe a single mother in maintenance could grasp advanced mathematics. She'd been content in the shadows, learning quietly, keeping her passion hidden. But now, thrust into the spotlight, she faced a choice: retreat to the safety of obscurity or embrace her truth. "I didn't know it was called the Liu Takahashi method," she said, her voice steadier now. "I've never had training beyond community college." "Impossible." Harrington scoffed, though his tone lacked conviction. "These concepts demand years of specialized study." Dr. Chen approached the board, studying Sarah's work closely. "Yet here it is, flawlessly executed." She turned to Sarah. "How?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze. In that moment, she thought of her daughter, Lily, working double shifts to save for college. A daughter who'd seen her mother diminish herself to avoid judgment. "Mathematics has always spoken to me," Sarah said simply. "When I see equations, I see patterns, connections. Solutions appear if I look long enough." A student in the third row spoke up. "But you're in maintenance. Why aren't you?" "Because life happens." Sarah cut in, a hint of resolve in her voice. "I had my daughter young. Her father left. I needed steady work with benefits." She gestured to the partially solved equation on the board. "This doesn't pay bills or cover health care for a child." The room fell quiet as her reality sank in among the academic crowd. "But why come to this symposium?" Harrington asked, now genuinely curious rather than mocking. Sarah met his eyes firmly. "Because I love mathematics. Because learning doesn't end when life gets hard. The chalk felt heavy in her hand. As she turned back to the board, the unfinished equation awaited, along with a decision that would alter her life's path. She could stop now, return to her seat, and resume her predictable life, or finish what she'd started and reveal the mind she'd hidden for so long. Sarah raised the chalk and faced the problem again. Her hand was steady now. "I'm going to finish this," she said, more to herself than the room of scholars. With that quiet resolve, Sarah Mitchell claimed her power, ready to show these elite minds what a humble woman from facilities management could achieve. Sarah turned to the board, chalk ready. The room fell utterly silent, the hush so deep that the chalk scratch against the blackboard rang like thunder. Her mind cleared as she entered the realm of pure mathematics, where titles and credentials meant nothing compared to the universal truth of correct solutions. She worked through the problem's remainder with fluid precision, her hand moving confidently. When faced with a particularly complex section, she paused, tilted her head, then took an unconventional approach, introducing a substitution that streamlined the entire equation. Chen gasped audibly. "She's using dimensional analysis to simplify the quantum variance," she whispered to her colleague. "I've never seen it done like that." Harrington stood stiffly, his face unreadable as Sarah's solution unfolded. It wasn't just correct, it was innovative, elegant, the kind of thinking that transcended mere computation. When Sarah boxed the final value and stepped back, silence held the room. The solution shone on the board like a revelation. She hadn't just solved Harrington's challenge. She'd refined it, uncovering efficiencies unpublished in any journal. Dr. Chen broke the silence first. "That's extraordinary," she said, approaching the board. "You've condensed 3 steps into one with this transformation." She turned to the room. "This isn't just correct, it's brilliant." A murmur rippled through the audience. Students who'd mocked earlier now gazed at Sarah with awe. Several professors discreetly snapped photos of her work with their phones. Harrington cleared his throat. "Though unconventional, the approach has some value." He conceded reluctantly, the words seeming to pain him. "Value?" Dr. Chen challenged, raising her eyebrows at him. "Richard, this could advance quantum encryption mathematics. This is publishable work." Sarah stood quietly, chalk dust on her fingers, feeling oddly detached from the growing commotion. She hadn't aimed to prove anyone wrong, she'd simply tackled the challenge as best she could. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said, facing her directly, "have you recorded any other mathematical insights?" Sarah hesitated. "I have notebooks. Things I work on at night when I can't sleep." "Notebooks," Harrington echoed, his professional curiosity finally outweighing his pride. "What kind of mathematics do you explore?" "Various things," Sarah replied, suddenly self-conscious again. "Mostly number theory, some work on prime factorization algorithms." Dr. Chen and Harrington exchanged stunned glances. Prime factorization was central to cryptography research, a highly sophisticated field. "I'd like to see those notebooks," Dr. Chen said firmly. A student from the front row stood. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," he declared, starting to clap. Others joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the hall. Sarah's cheeks flushed, this time with embarrassment rather than shame. The applause was unexpected and unasked for. As it continued, she caught the eye of a young woman in the back row who'd watched intently throughout. The woman nodded at her with deep respect, as if witnessing something transformative. In that moment, Sarah realized her actions went beyond mathematics. She'd become visible. Truly visible. Perhaps for the first time in her adult life. Her knowledge, her intellect, her potential had stepped into the light. The applause eventually faded, but something had fundamentally shifted in the lecture hall. Not just for Sarah, but for everyone who'd witnessed her journey from unseen to extraordinary. Though the symposium had officially ended an hour ago, the hall remained crowded. Sarah found herself surrounded by professors and students, all eager to discuss her mathematical insights. Dr. Chen stayed close, almost protective. Your intuitive understanding of multidimensional analysis is remarkable. A quantum computing professor told her, "Have you ever considered formal study?" Sarah gave a wistful smile. Considered it.
Yes, afforded it?
No. Across the room, Harrington was in heated discussion with the department dean, gesturing animatedly and occasionally pointing at Sarah. His earlier arrogance had evolved into a complex mix of reluctant respect and defensiveness. Dr. Chen touched Sarah's arm gently. "We need to discuss your future," she said quietly. "MIT has fellowship programs for exceptional cases like yours." Sarah looked at her, startled. "MIT? Me? Talent like yours is rare," Dr. Chen replied. "It would be a disservice to mathematics to let it go undeveloped." The crowd parted as Harrington approached. "Ems, Mitchell," he said formally, his silver beard trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "The department would like to review your notebooks, if you're willing. There may be opportunities to explore." His words were careful, not quite an apology, but the closest he could manage. Sarah nodded. "I'll bring them tomorrow." "I'll review them personally," Dr. Chen interjected, giving Harrington a pointed look that made his jaw tighten. As the crowd thinned, Sarah gathered her things. Her phone showed 5 missed calls from the babysitter, a reminder of the real-world responsibilities that had always limited her mathematical pursuits. At the exit, a young female student stopped her. "Ms. Mitchell," she said hesitantly. "I'm an engineering student, and I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Sarah asked. "For proving that where you start doesn't define what you know." The student's eyes shone with emotion. "I'm a first-generation college student from a small town. People judge me, too." Warmth spread through Sarah's chest. She hadn't realized her moment could inspire others. Outside, the evening air felt alive with possibility. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of the notebooks at home, filled with years of private mathematical exploration. Tomorrow, those personal thoughts would be scrutinized by some of the nation's top mathematicians. It was daunting. It was thrilling. For the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell dared to envision a different future, one where her intellect, not her job, defined her. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a different classroom, smaller, with eager undergraduates watching her explain a complex theorem. The sleeves of her gray sweater were rolled up as she wrote across the whiteboard. No longer tentative, she claimed her space with confidence. Her life had changed rapidly. After the symposium, Dr. Chen had secured an emergency fellowship, recognizing that talent like Sarah's couldn't wait for traditional timelines. 2 of her theoretical approaches had been published, with her name as the lead author. Harrington had come around, albeit slowly, after being outvoted in several department meetings. He now grudgingly acknowledged her insights, especially after her quantum encryption work drew attention from research institutions nationwide. The greatest change was within Sarah. She no longer hid her brilliance or passion. She spoke with authority, knowing her worth stemmed from her mind, not credentials. Her daughter, Lily, had enrolled at the university on a full scholarship, inspired by her mother to pursue her dreams unapologetically. As Sarah finished her explanation, a student raised her hand, a young woman with hesitant eyes but a determined question. Sarah called on her immediately, recalling what it felt like to be invisible. "Never fear asking your question," she told her students. "The question you hesitate to ask might change everything for you and everyone here." If Sarah's journey from overlooked to extraordinary moved you, Remember that brilliance often hides in unexpected places, masked by circumstance, not ability. Who might you be overlooking in your own life? We'd love to hear your stories of undiscovered talents. Where are you watching from today? Share in the comments below. If this story of recognition and transformation resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of remarkable moments that change lives forever. Sometimes, the greatest minds aren't found in lecture halls, but cleaning them. Like, share, and join our community celebrating unsung heroes everywhere.